Lesson 66 is still going to cover these trigonomic functions that we have. Basically, you know how to find sine, cosine, and tangent, SOHCAHTOA, using the measurements that you know, or I should say the ratios that you know of sine, cosine, and tangent. You can use those ratios and the inverse function on your calculator to find the measure of an angle. Now, inverse is right here. Sine -1, cosine -1, tan -1. Find those functions on your calculator. You'll probably need to use the second function and then hit the sine, cosine, or tangent, and you'll get that inverse function on your calculator. So in example 9, we want the tan V, which is talking about angle V. So we're going to say tan -1, and then inside that on your calculator it'll actually probably come up something like this, tan -1, and then it'll look like this displayed on your calculator screen. And then we're going to substitute this in, that being the ratio that has been rounded. Now when you hit equals, it is going to give us the interior angle measure, and we want to round to the nearest degree. So when we hit that, you see that on your calculator it's displayed as 39.000555251. So to the nearest degree, that is approximately 39 degrees. Same in example 10 here, except we're going to use the inverse of the sine. Input in our calculator, we look at what's displayed, and we again round to the nearest degree, so we have 20 degrees. And example 11, cosine W, we're going to go ahead and figure out the inverse for cosine, and we should get 24 degrees. So now you kind of have an idea of the inverse function on the calculator for sine, cosine, and tangent. Here's kind of the approach that you're going to take in order to figure out the interior degree where that question mark is at. So what you need to do is find the measure of the indicated angle to the nearest degree. So you need to determine, do you need to use sine, cosine, or tangent? And a couple times, you might be able to use more than one. You might be able to use sine or cosine, or tangent or sine. But you need to determine what's going to work best to find that given angle. Normally what I like to do is go ahead and identify the angle that we need, and that is the question mark. What we know is what is adjacent to it, and we also know the hypotenuse. So we know adjacent and hypotenuse. So we need to use cosine here. Cosine, remember, in order to figure out the interior angle, you'll use the inverse. So we'll have cosine -1, and then we're going to go ahead and input the fraction here. So adjacent over hypotenuse. Here's adjacent over hypotenuse, and then go ahead and hit equals in our calculator, and we will round to the nearest degree, which would be 31 degrees. That would be that measure there of that acute angle. Example 13, here's the angle that we need to know. Thing that we know is opposite, and we also know what is adjacent, because this obviously angle here would be that hypotenuse. So we know opposite and adjacent, therefore we're going to use tangent. So to find out that interior angle, we'll use the inverse of tangent, and that is the opposite over adjacent. Hit equals on our calculator, and we'll round to the nearest degree, which would be 27 degrees would be that interior angle. Example 14, notice we know actually all three sides here. So there's actually a couple ways you should be able to solve this. There's a multiple steps here, and it really doesn't matter which one you choose to use. Here you could use tangent, or you actually could use cosine. If we look at this, I'm going to go ahead, and here's the angle that we need to find out. If I were to use tangent, tangent would be opposite, so opposite over adjacent, and here would be adjacent. So I'm going to say inverse tan, and we'll go opposite, which would be 36 over adjacent 77. Go ahead, hit equals, round to the nearest degree, which would be 25 degrees. You could also use cosine. Cosine, so here we have cosine. We'd use the inverse. The inverse of cosine would be the adjacent of this angle, So 77 over the hypotenuse, which would be 85, you can go ahead, it equals, and you would still see that 25 degrees would work. This will conclude lesson 66, inverse of trigonomic functions.